QuickTime, so that'll do for right now. Anyway, the reason we're having this lunch and learn today is to go over the new methodology for the reflected ceiling plans that the BIM team's sort of been working out. I've been incorporating into the most recent version of the template. The BIM manual page for reflected ceiling plans has been updated to reflect those changes. It's actually a relatively minor change, all things considered. We're just taking sort of the emphasis away from the 3D document portion of the reflected ceiling plans and putting it onto the floor plan version or viewpoint of the reflected ceiling plans. The reason for this is it eliminates a lot of the 2D drafting portions. It turns our reflected ceiling plans more into a coordinated BIM document and less of just a drafted exercise. Previously, a lot of our ceiling fixtures were 2D only, laid over the 3D document, and now we're relying on the floor plan view for almost all of the document settings and document elements. The 3D document is still necessary in order to show the ceiling planes, board patterns, box beams, trusses, rafters, anything exposed at the ceiling. The reason that we still have to use the 3D document is that even if you had your ceiling slab separated from the floor slab above, it's only going to show the cover fill for the top of that slab, and that slab is still going to mask things out that are below it. So we basically take conceptually everything from the cut plane downward shows on the floor plan view, with the exception of ceiling fixtures, light fixtures. So the light fixtures show in floor plan so that we can get the plan symbol appearance of those fixtures. You know, say like a recessed can light shows up with its recessed can symbol in plan. In the 3D document, it would show the literal projection. So if you had something like, say, a directional arrow associated with that can fixture, you don't get that in the 3D document unless you place the can in the 3D document directly, which is a 2D only instance. So we're trying to eliminate that sort of redundancy. Or there are even cases before we just left the cans out of the model and didn't rely on them for our rendering and things like that. So this allows us to have an all-inclusive 3D matches 2D, matches our documents kind of system. Sorry about the noise here. Apparently the kids are having lunch upstairs. Anyway, so the document here is using the Yellowstone project as an example. This was sort of maybe pioneered. I think that this is the first instance that we actually used this sort of switched up system. So I incorporated the Yellowstone project into the latest template just to make sure that all of this checks out and works with the latest template. And we're going to go through all of these moving parts. And there's a few tips and things like that that really emphasize the benefit of using this system over the previous 3D document heavy system. Things like model view options, all of the settings in here for that. The model view options include an oftentimes ignored setting here for hiding the zone stamps. This allows you to leave the zone on in your plan view, but basically suppress the stamp. So, and that's super advantageous because then we can have the room name in a separate location on our 3D documents from our floor plan. That's important because oftentimes we want the room name to be at the center of the room for our floor plans, but the center of the room is also one of the most common places to put a light fixture. So then we have a room name over the top of a light fixture. So we'll take a look at that sort of in real time, how to apply that. Graphic overrides, the same concept applies where we want furniture, casework, plumbing fixtures, all of that stuff to show up gray, super light pen weight, and transparent. So we're de-emphasizing everything from the cut line down, but we still want to show that. We want to show how our light fixture relates to the countertop edge or relates to the furniture layout or any of that stuff. The current template, super simple in terms of graphic override. It's just all layers that start with AI, so the interior layers, and any layer that contains AP, the plumbing layers, gets overridden to be white fill, transparent, with a light gray pen weight. So that's really simple, way more simplified than our previous graphic override combinations where we were kind of juggling between the 3D document and the floor plan. Floor plan cut planes are covered in here. That's all pretty basic and simple. And that a lot of that stuff has to be sort of assessed project by project, depending on the exact design of the project. The floor plan cut plane might make sense to be up higher or lower, depending on window heights, sill heights, header heights, things like that. 3D document settings. This should be kind of the same as what it's always been. We're not showing a lot of things cut through anymore. But just showing the surface foreground fill. They've renamed that setting in 3D documents. And then paying attention to how many stories above we're showing. So in a 3-story project, you probably don't need to show the roof overhangs that are at the 3rd level. So controlling that show above current story setting can help you sort of assess what's showing on each story's 3D document. There's a few additional tips down here. We're going to talk about those sort of on the fly as we're going through, specifically about those zones and room name labels like we were talking about. And then we're going to talk about what the view map setup is for this. I'm going to backtrack a little bit here for a second to say that this new system, and as with any sort of standard shift or template shift, we're not expecting every project that's way down the road to start adopting these new standards. The new template has these standards incorporated, and they're not so vastly different that if you've started your project but haven't started laying out 3D or reflected ceiling plans, that you can't adopt these new standards. I've actually transitioned a few projects into this system of floor plan heavy documentation for RCPs. So if you are looking at starting your reflected ceiling plans or just have started your reflected ceiling plans, reach out to me, let me know that you need help transitioning to this new system. If you've already started laying out fixtures and annotating and documenting and keynoting, it's probably not worth it to transition over. It's going to be basically redoing everything. But if you're just looking at getting things onto the sheet, just looking at placing fixtures and things like that, that's a good time to look at making this transition. And typically it's half an hour to an hour tops, and it's something that I can do on my end and then just kind of get you back up to speed afterwards. So reach out to me directly, message me, let me know that you need help setting up the RCPs if you are working from any project that basically has been started before last month. Otherwise, everything kind of has these new systems baked into it to some degree. All right, so looking at this copy of Yellowstone, let me move my zoom cameras over. You'll see in every project, even the older ones, there's going to be these 3 views. One is the reflected ceiling plan that's developed from a floor plan view. One is the floor plan view, and in about the last 6 to 8 months of the template, that's set in bold, do not modify. That's basically where that 3D document is generated from. You would open up this floor plan view, which should match the layer combination of the 3D document, and then you go to Document, Create 3D Document, or you can right-click the 3D document and say Redefine, or go to the 3D document settings, I should say, and redefine with the current floor plan settings. So here we can see all of these plan slabs and everything else that would be included in that 3D document that are actually excluded in the floor plan view here. So the floor plan view does not include the ceiling planes. Another advantage to using the floor plan view is it allows us to have more graphic consistency in our plan set. So while door swings may not be critical for a 3D document, it is important to have some sort of cohesive appearance and graphic standard in our plans. So we don't have to deal with the fact that our doors show symbolically different in our reflected ceiling plans than they do in our floor plans or our furniture plans or whatever other plans we're generating. There's some consistency there. But all of these fixtures are placed directly in the floor plan view rather than in the 3D document view. All of our labels, our annotations, our dimensions, our center lines, all of that stuff is established here in the floor plan view. So it gives us a lot easier way to document, annotate. There are less issues, fewer issues. We're mentioning the dimension bugs that we're sort of dealing with right now. There are few of those in floor plan than there are in 3D document. I'm not saying that they don't happen. I will recognize that they do happen, but they don't happen as often in the floor plan view as they do in the 3D documents. So there's a lot of advantages there. Another advantage I mentioned before is the ability to have a zone name or the room name independent from the zone tag location. So in my floor plan layer combination, I might see, oh, that layer is actually on. If I go to my reflected ceiling plan, actually let's just switch this over here to floor plan. And then we'll see those zone tags pop up here at some point. Yeah, so you see the zone names here popping up. So that zone name might be in the wrong spot. Right here, it's definitely in the wrong spot. Right here, it's right where we've got a centerline annotation. We certainly could move that out of the way and hope that it's not in the way of some other annotation in the floor plan view. Or we just use the RCP floor plan model view option to hide that zone stamp. And then what we can do, wait for this to process. It's a big file, so it takes a little bit. But what we can do at that point is actually just grab all of our zones. And if you go to Document, where are we at here? Label Selected Elements. You can automatically add labels. And then the label tool that we're using there is a new label to ArchiCAD 25. It's the zone label. This allows us to have a label that automatically associates to that zone. So if, for example, this room right here, if I can get to that zone, if this room was renamed bedroom 2 or whatever it ends up being, that label updates with it. So it's tied to that. We don't have to worry about coordinating dumb text. So the other aspect, and probably the most beneficial aspect, is that can then be moved out of the way. We could decide that bunk bath is just in the way. We don't need to label that room here. It's unnecessary. So these tight rooms, you can either move the room name off to the side and put a leader. You can get rid of the room name altogether. It gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can incorporate those room names into the reflected ceiling plan documents. Once you have the 3D document set up and the floor plan set up and annotated, take a quick look at the 3D document settings here, just so you have an idea. Again, make sure you coordinate, show up stories, the number of stories we want to see on that. The floor plan cut plane height is not relative to home story, it's relative to project 0, so just be aware of that. The offset to show above the current stories, that could be set to 0 if everything on that story is within that story's range. Cut elements should not necessarily be overridden just by element type. Not that there are any cut elements in the 3D documents anymore. It's really just the ceiling planes, rafters, beams, the things that are not being cut through. And then we want the surface foreground fill to be shown. Sun shadows are off. All of these settings basically just unchecked. So once you have all of that set up, we can verify here that this lines up. Once it opens, and we'll see kind of what that 3D document developed from that floor plan looks like. And you can see actually where those can lights, those ceiling fixtures, are punching a hole in that ceiling, which is actually beneficial because it helps us to line things up. The other thing that I've done in the template right now is I'm showing the column layer on both the 3D document and the floor plan. That also gives me a way to make sure that on that layout, when those things get dropped into the layout, that those line up. So I can actually physically line up that column from the floor plan to the 3D document and verify that those two things line up, because we're not showing walls and we're not showing actual cut elements for the most part in the 3D document. So that allows us to line those things up. In terms of coordinating can lights with the ceiling, or any light fixture with the ceiling, what I've found is the most effective is to, from the floor plan view, once you get those things lined up, select the floor plan, and you can see that, sorry, it's a little bit slow here. In the corner of the sheet, one way to manage those two overlapping views, the 3D document and the floor plan view, boy, it is really slow, is that I've actually pulled the corner back on one of those two overlapping views, so that I can easily select one or the other. The full view is of the floor plan because that's the primary view, but you can open the source view with the layout as a reference. 3D documents don't make good trace references, so I found that actually using the layout as a reference for coordinating these light fixtures to the board joints is the best way to manage that. So you can then move and verify that these light fixtures are centered up on the boards or whatever relationship they need to have with those boards and other ceiling elements. An important thing there is to make sure that you actually turn that trace reference off once you're done with it, because that trace reference really does bog things down. A couple of other tips with that. I usually set that 3D document to manual update, and I know that there have been situations where manual update has caused some publishing issues, but you really should get a publishing warning if something is set to manual update and it's not up to date. So that 3D document being manual update can also make using this layout as a trace reference a little bit more efficient. So that as you're moving fixtures and stuff, the layout isn't trying to update in the background, which can really bog things way, way down. Let me go back to my list of tricks, tips, and oh, here's another one. A lot of times when we start laying these things over and piecing them together, we end up with sort of patchwork puzzle pieces in order to fit everything on the sheet. Make sure that this include drawing and ID sequence is unchecked for everything except the drawings that include a drawing number. Otherwise you get like, you'll drop a new drawing on here, maybe there's like a blow up of part of it in a detail or something like that that's going to have a title. It'll go like 1 and then 7 as the next drawing. So in order to exclude those, just make sure that that's unchecked. So model view options, graphic overrides, documentation on the floor plan, keynotes on the floor plan, and then really just using the ceiling or the 3D document for ceiling elements. I think that in terms of other elements that may show up in the 3D document that may benefit from being a 3D document element, decorative fixtures. A lot of times we have sort of cable run decorative fixtures that it makes sense to have the actual projected view rather than a symbolic view. I think that having the ceiling registers, HVA, ductwork, things like that that penetrate the ceiling, it could benefit from showing those as the actual projected instead of symbolic view. Because a lot of times we don't even have a symbolic view for those things. There are objects that we use for ceiling registers, but it makes sense just to show the full extent of those elements along with the boards and or beams or ceiling treatment that associates with them. So that stuff can all go on to the 3D document as well. Any questions?
Yeah, Pat, I have a question. It's John. You, I think in the preview had mentioned something about heights being auto-populated on the zone stamps that you just created. Can you show us how to do that?
Yeah, so the zone stamp here, if for example I wanted a zone or ceiling height in this room, if I go to the settings, the current template, and this is actually pretty recent, so unless your project started in the last 2 weeks, you probably won't have these favorites. But the current template includes favorites under annotation labels for ceiling height. There's, where is it at here? Zone stamp room name and number, and then there's ceiling height. And they're all using the zone stamp. So here, for example, this says ceiling height 12. That's pulling from the actual height of that zone. And if you want these in your project, if it's useful, we can copy those in. I can send you a favorites file. But it's basically tying to that zone height. This does require that you actually coordinate. Let me make sure I'm showing zones here. You coordinate that room height to the actual height of that ceiling. I know that zone height is an often overlooked parameter. If I'm looking right here at, it looks like when I copied and pasted, that was a little bit screwy. Anyway, this room right here, that zone, is definitely not at the ceiling height. So this is the sort of thing that if you're going to use these automated annotation features, you're going to have to make sure that you're modeling to that level of detail so that the zones are actually set to the height of the ceiling, which looks like it's actually right there. if we turn that layer on. In fact, we can verify that it's right there because that's where that can fixture is at, and that would be punching through. So now we should see this update to that new ceiling height. Yeah, so that's a 10-foot ceiling, not a 12-foot ceiling. So making sure that those zones are actually modeled correctly. It's an easy thing to overlook because we don't see those zones in 3D. We usually, by default, in the filter and cut elements, we suppress them, we hide them, because they end up really muddying up the model. But it's something that's important that you set. They can be tied to the floor-to-floor height, but there's just so many times, I would say more times than not, that the ceiling does not match the floor-to-floor height, the story settings. It's like below the story settings by X number of feet. So understanding and knowing what those ceiling heights are is really important. Sometimes that just has to be manual text. There's no way to automate, I shouldn't say there's no way, there's always a way, but there's no way to easily automate. You end up jumping through more hoops than it's worth. So for like slope ceiling, for example, if you wanted the plate height and the slope annotated on a slope ceiling, I think it's just easier to put that in as a dumb text or as a manual text label or something like that. You could certainly use a label and have it associated to the ceiling or associated to the wall so that if it moves, the annotation moves with it. But in terms of the text and the content, getting that height and that slope from something automated just is not really feasible.
Okay. Thanks, Pat.
I have another question, Annalie, here. How do we make sure that all of these annotations and light fixtures don't show up in the floor plan? Is that just through the layer combination?
It is, yeah. So the annotation should be on RCP, the annotation RCP layer. The light fixtures should be on the electrical ceiling fixture layer. There's actually, in the layer combinations of the most recent template, if we look at the here, the AE, we can differentiate between the ceiling, the floor fixture, and AE symbols, which is technically wall fixtures, so maybe that becomes ceiling fixture layer. But that's really what those three are for. The lamps layer is really not necessary anymore. The lamps layer was what we used for the short time that we were using CineRender to put actual light sources into ArchiCAD. I don't know that makes sense to keep in here because everything's really either ceiling, floor, or symbols. If it's like a decorative table lamp or floor lamp, that's really part of the furniture package, so that doesn't even really belong in the electrical layers section. But yeah, that visibility of what shows on the floor plan versus what shows on the reflected ceiling plan versus what shows on the RCP 3D document is all managed by layer combos. If we go back to this document right here, the very first part is a series of bullet points of some recommended, like show this on this viewpoint versus this viewpoint. And all of this is controlled by layer combinations. Other questions? Okay, well, I recommend if you have some time, go ahead and read through the new BIM manual page. It's just under workflow and documentation and reflected ceiling plans. Actually, the link right here may not be working because it goes to the old one. So it might have to be through the drop down here. I'll fix that before the end of the day today. Anyway, that's where this page is at. Go ahead and read through it. Feel free to reach out to me, message me if you have any questions. Like I said, if you are just starting your reflected ceiling plans, if you don't have anything annotated, if you don't have fixtures placed, and maybe even if you do have fixtures placed, if you've taken the time to place them in a 3D document, they can technically be copied from the 3D document into the floor plan, and then they're live to the model. So if you're not too far down the road, we can transition to this new system. Again, the idea being that we just really want to eliminate those redundancies of having something in the model as a 3D element and in the 3D document as a 2D drafted element. Those sorts of redundancies really lead to a lot of coordination issues or just headaches trying to manage and maintain that coordination between one viewpoint and another.
Oh, I did have another question when you were talking about that. So the goal is to model everything in 3D and to not have any 2D lines in the RCPs. Is that correct?
The line work for annotation purposes is fine. So like these drafted center lines is fine. But if for example, this fixture right here, if we just isolate out this corner of the room, for example, if we're going to show these fixtures, and I apologize for all the missing surfaces, I didn't actually check that, but like I said, this was copied from another file into this. So if these are going to show up as part of our twin motion model, for example, showing these light sources and light fixtures, if we're coordinating these, the other reason to show and model these is so that we can coordinate them with our structural package. If we have an IFC file from the engineer, we want to make sure that we don't have a recessed can running through a major beam, or that it's all coordinated with the joist layout and things like that. We can't do that if it's 2D only, so having these as 3D elements is useful. But when we used to place those here in the 3D document, they would show up as a symbol, but they wouldn't actually track through to the 3D model. So that's where you'd have the redundancy. If for example, I place, I'm just going to grab the object right here. If I grab that object, I drop it and place it into here, it doesn't exist in 3D. It's just the 2D plan symbol on the ArchiCAD layer. And that's how we used to do it. We used to just say, well, there's the plan symbol, and we'll have to have, if we need to show that, we'll have to add it into the model and hide it on all the layer combos. This doesn't actually exist in 3D. If I were to try and isolate this out from here, there's no recessed can light there. It's a 2D only symbol. You could do the same thing with any object. I could use a plumbing fixture and place it into here, and it's only going to show the floor plan symbol. It doesn't actually exist in 3D.
Are we supposed to do this, or this is how we used to do it?
That's placing fixtures into the 3D document is how we used to do it. There still are a lot of files that were started that way, so it could be that the file you're working on right now has the fixtures placed into the 3D document. It's just not, it has redundancies to it, or yeah, there's just too many drawbacks to doing it that way, and having this system of using the floor plan as the primary document source has solved a lot of problems.
Okay. So your recommendation is to always use the 3D light fixtures, 3D elements, symbols, what is it called?
Yeah. Place the fixtures in the floor plan view. There are quite a few light fixtures. I don't recommend using the lamp tool for much of anything. There are some lamp objects elements in the lamp tool, but they're all just kind of really ugly and clunky. So like the recessed spotlight here, for example, it just doesn't look like any light that we would use. So we've developed a light fixture in the Walker-Warner library under lighting. There's a lot of fixtures by manufacturer, but there's this generic recessed downlight simple and recessed can light objects. They allow you to have a ceiling slope. They give you options for aperture type, so you can do a round or a square with a round aperture. And they all have like the same 3D appearance. I know that there's a lot of just sort of clunky text. I didn't script in a graphic interface for this, but it does allow you to have different symbol appearances. You can have a symbolic view with a directional arrow in here. There's all sorts of different settings in here. If you need help setting this up, let me know. But even just if you were to just click on it right here, it's going to give you a better appearance than anything in the lamp settings. There's some generic pendants in here. There's the McEwen lighting fixtures. There's restoration hardware fixtures that we've used a bunch of. There's some schoolhouse fixtures just as good generic placeholders. There's quite a few fixtures that we've built out in here. And we're always sort of trying to look at expanding this. I'm looking at adding monopoint lights to the library soon, hopefully, if I can figure out that script. So the fixtures in here, they're great, they work, but I think the one that we use the most of is this recessed can light simple.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me know if anything else comes up. If you do have any questions or think of anything later, if you go reading through the 3D document, or sorry, the reflected ceiling plan document on the BIM manual page, and you have any questions about that, just feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.